I'm going to introduce Sam in just a moment, and then Sam will say some remarks prior to the film. You all should each have a link in your emails from the studio to be able to watch the film. This Zoom line will stay open. And so when you come back, when you're done watching the film, come back to this Zoom line, and we will get to talk about the film with our fantastic panel from ACLU Washington, Washington for Black Lives, and MAPSE Men. All right. Mr. Pollard, are you ready?
Yes, I am, Monisha.
Fantastic. I would like to welcome you all to Sam Pollard. I've actually been a big fan of his work. I've seen a great deal of his pieces, and particularly his direction in cinematography. This film, MLK FBI, you will hopefully be as inspired and intrigued by it as I was. But I thought it was an amazing opportunity to be able to hear directly from Sam to talk about, why is it that you decided to pursue this film, and where did you start and where did it leave you when it was done? And then we'll have an opportunity, with your words fresh in our head, to watch the film and then have a discussion afterwards. So, Sam, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. So in late 2017, early 2018, the producer of the film, Bennett Dean, had read a book by the historian David Garrow that was about Dr. King being surveilled by the FBI and Edgar Hoover. And after he read the book, he said, gave me a call and said, "Man, I think we found our next film." We had just finished a film called Two Trains Running, about the search for these two iconic blues musicians in the 60s, Son House and Skip James in 1964, doing Freedom Summer. So I read the book and I completely agreed with Ben. I said, yeah, I think this should be a film. And I happen to know David Garrow because he had been one of our major advisors on EYEZ on the Prize too. So we reached out to David, took an option on this book. And then at some point in 2018, we flew out to Pittsburgh, where he's from, and we took a camera crew over to his house, and we spent 4 hours with him, having him talk about the genesis of the book, the research he uncovered, all the information, about wiretapping and bugging Dr. King's rooms and those of his associates, what they were trying to do and trying to discredit and destroy Dr. King's reputation. And that's where the idea of the film came from. Then we went out, we created a sizzle reel, and we went out and tried to raise the money, and we went to places like Netflix and Amazon, and we always got the same response: "Oh, it's a good idea, but we don't really have a bandwidth for it now on our streaming service." So around early 2019, we were able to get funding from two organizations, Field of Vision and another company called Play Action. And they came in with the bulk of the money, which enabled us to do the rest of our interviews with Chuck Knox, a former FBI agent, James Comey, the former executive director of the FBI, Donna Murch, Beverly Gage, two historians, one who spoke about the history and the building of the mythology of the FBI, and Donna Murch, who talked about COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program that was started by the FBI to really infiltrate and destroy organizations like the SCLC, the Nation of Islam, the Black Panther Party, and people like Dr. King and Malcolm X, Angela Davis, Huey P. Newton, Bobby Seale, Kathleen Cleaver, the list goes on. And then we decided that we wanted to interview two of Dr. King's close associates, and that turned out to be Andy Young, who we all very familiar with, and Clarence Jones, who had been Dr. King's lawyer at the time. And that was all the people we were going to interview. So we brought on archival producers. We brought on a wonderful editor named Laura Tomaselli, who did a fabulous job editing the film. And we shot some recreation stuff that you'll see in the film that supposedly gives you a sense of the FBI going through files and listening to tapes, recordings for Dr. King. And we edited most of the film during the pandemic remotely. Laura was in upstate New York. I was here in New York City, and Ben was in Atlanta. And we were able to get a cut that was pretty good by middle of July that we submitted to Toronto. And, frankly, Monisha, this was one of the few films that got a lot of love right out of the gate. We got accepted to Toronto. We got accepted to Telluride. We got accepted to the New York Film Festival. We even got accepted to Sundance 2021, but we decided not to go with them. So, and then IFC picked it up as for distribution, which has been really very, very good. They've really done a lot of powerful work getting the film out there to the public. You know, they enabled us to make the short list of the Academy Awards, even though we didn't make the final five. But it's been a really good run for this film. It's been very exciting.
It has been, so in watching this film, it was chilling the lengths or the depths that the FBI went through to try to discredit Dr. King. Is there any big takeaways that you felt by the time that you finished the project that, you know, with film, it leaves a legacy. What's the legacy that you want this film to leave?
Well, you know, the big takeaway for me is that we as Americans should understand that the FBI's role is basically, you know, to keep the status quo. And anybody who they feel is stepping out of the line in terms of their notion of the status quo and the notion of democracy, you know, they see as a threat to American stability. And it was very prominent in the 50s and 60s when Hoover saw many of these Black leaders and Black organizations as threats to his notion of American democracy, which was what segregation, lynchings, you know, the killing of Black people. So, you know, it should be a wake up call. It should be a wake up call to all of us to be careful in terms of who we believe in, and that's, you know, the forces supposedly of good, which is the federal government, sometimes aren't working for good. They're working to undermine, you know, people like Dr. King and the civil rights people, civil rights movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, who are basically trying to say, America, take off the blinders, you know, look at our history, look at, you know, what this country was built, who this country was built on, the blood of slaves, the genocide of Native people, you know, you know, the you know, when Asians, the Chinese Exclusion Act. I mean, we have a pretty sordid history, you know. So when you hear, you know, and you and you know, when I hear Americans say, you know, America, love it or leave it, you can't say anything negative about America. These people are out of their mind because America has lots of baggage. You know, we're supposedly supposed to be spreading democracy, but what does that really mean in America? The notion of spreading democracy, when for many years there was no democracy for Black people and other peoples of color.
Were there, do you think there will be people who won't believe it, that won't believe our government is capable of what you showed?
What do you think? Absolutely. Look at these yahoos who attacked the Capitol. You know, look at these people, these right wing extremists who believe that, you know, America do or die. You know, and that their idea of an American, you know, is to be free, white, and 21. They don't say those terms anymore, but that's what they believe. You know, look at what Georgia's just done with these voter suppression laws. What's that all about? To suppress the vote of Black people, you know, so they don't have to deal with what happened in 2020. And, you know, and Trump can probably say, oh, that guy Kemp is really trying to do the right thing now. I'm not gonna say bad things about him anymore, which he probably will, but who knows?
Now you showed the role pretty clearly that Bobby Kennedy played in this.
Yeah, because listen, this is gonna be sacrilege to a lot of people. You know, Bobby Kennedy in the 50s and early 60s, you know, he was in the bed. He was a rabid anti-communist, like many people were at that time. He gave Hoover his blessing and signed off on Hoover wiretapping Dr. King. You know, John Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy were not angels. They weren't all of a sudden in love with Black people. You know, they basically came to the table because they were trying to hopefully that they weren't going to, the cities weren't going to be burnt down. You know, and so they had to embrace the civil rights movement because things were changing, as we all know. And sure, but listen, I got to this thing the other day about another film we're working on, and we were doing a section on MLK, and the producer asked me to do. We did a section with Bobby Kennedy announced MLK's assassination, and she said we should broaden this, because Bobby Kennedy's become, because of his, becoming wanting to run for president and his ideology changed, he's become he's become like someone you can't say anything bad about anymore. But look at his history. Sure, he had an epiphany, but it came late. He had an epiphany, he had a change, but he had to have his coattails pulled. Dr. King didn't have to have his coattails pulled. Malcolm didn't have to have his coattails pulled.
Well, it reminded me.
I'm going off.
No, it reminded me of the Dr. King quote that it's the silence of your friends, right? And so it was stunning to me to watch the Kennedys' role in the surveillance in attempts to fail Dr. King. What
Now,
do you? Oh, go ahead.
The question you have to ask yourself is: did Hoover? Did he communicate with Bobby Kennedy after the initial wiretapping, how far they were going, in terms of trying to discredit King, bugging the hotel rooms, learning about his extramarital affairs? Well, obviously they knew about them. Lyndon Johnson knew about them. So I would imagine he told these guys. He told Bobby Kennedy. He probably, we know he told Lyndon Johnson. So.
So what do you hope that the generation who might not know this information, or as they go forward in activism, or as they go forward in making their voices heard, what do you think they can take from this film, or what do you think they should bring with them from this work?
They should take from this film the importance of studying our history. For young, people of color, African American children, not to know who Rosa Parks is, or Martin Luther King, or the importance of the civil rights movement in the '60s, or Malcolm X, or the impact that the Black Power movement had. After Stokely came out saying we want Black Power. This should be a wake up call. Learn our history, because if you learn our history, you can see that many of the things that you see in this film is still being repeated in America today. When the lady in the film, maybe I shouldn't say this because people haven't seen the film. I won't say it.
Say it, because they'll reflect on it.
Okay, when the lady in the film says to Dr. King on that TV show, "Don't you feel your peaceful protests are causing the riots in the cities?" Didn't we hear that same dialogue in 2020 about Black Lives Matter? Don't you think the Black Lives Matter protests are causing riots in the cities? There's this sort of like amnesia. All of a sudden, that you think that people of color, Black people, are trying to burn down these cities because of peaceful protests. They're trying to burn down these damn cities because they're fed up. They're fed up. How many times we have to see now with these body cams, Black men, Black women being killed, like we're like rag mops, our bodies don't mean anything, and the tragic thing, Monisha, is that now that we see it, there's still no justice. How many of these police officers still get off, get their pensions, get a slap on the wrist? It's amazing, it's amazing. It's amazing how America keeps, it's like the day I was just saying to my wife, the senators and the Congress people are talking about, banning automatic weapons. How many times we're going to hear this dialogue, and America doesn't want to do anything about it? They don't want to do a damn thing about it. Because that the Second Amendment about the right to bear arms. America's. I was showing my class last night. I was talking about the Western genre, the Westerns that I grew up on. And even though people don't watch Westerns like they used to when I was a young man, they still buy this mythology. Americans still buy this mythology that, we are like frontiersmen. We are here to conquer, by any means necessary. It's crazy. America shouldn't even talk about trying to spread democracy to anybody in the world with their bloody past and causing coups and destroying other countries, nations, because they wanted people to become democratic. It's hogwash.
Well, it will be hard to hold the moral high ground, uh, especially when these records potentially become public in
Yeah,
2027.
2027. Yeah, the
Thank
moral high
you.
ground. The moral high ground. What a joke.
Thank you, Mr. Pollard. I am so grateful for you opening up this film for us today. We now get to go watch your work, and what a wonderful work it is. We really appreciate all that you've done, and look forward to more fantastic work from you. I've watched a number of the collaborations you've done with Spike Lee, and you always bring tremendous talent. So thank you so much for allowing us to show your film today.
Thank you very much, Monisha. Have a great screening, folks.
You
Enjoy
too.
yourself.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
All right, everybody. So you're going to have an opportunity now to go to your email. You'll get the link to the screening. And this Zoom line will be open. But go watch the screening. And then just after the screening's done, we'll give you a couple minutes to go have a break, but then come back here. And so right about 8 o'clock, we will have the after discussion panel. And trust me, you'll want to come back because it is a movie that you will want to talk about after you see it. Thanks so much, and we'll see you soon.
I was just saying it was a really phenomenal film, and having the director on before to talk a little bit about it just provided such good context for following some of the threads. So I'm really excited that I get to talk about it with all of you.
Fantastic. Well, we have our audience here. We can't see them, but they can see us. So you hold those thoughts. Michelle is on her way, and we'll introduce ourselves and get to have a really amazing discussion.
Excellent.
And for those of us for those joining us today, thank you for bearing with us. A year into the pandemic, we still have technical glitches. So if you didn't quite get to finish the film, the link that you received from IFC is good through Sunday, and you can watch it 5 times or up to Sunday. So if you want to watch it again, if you want to finish it, if you want to pass it off to a friend, that link's got 5 views in it. So feel free to pass it along to others and share tonight's movie with them. Welcome, Michelle.
Hello,
So,
good to be here.
I know that we've got a wonderful audience with us today. Thank you all for joining us, and I am just thrilled that these amazing people agreed to be with us tonight. One, I know how busy they are, and two, they're some of the most brilliant people I know, and some of the people who likely would be part of the group surveilled. So really wanted to be able to have a discussion with this group, especially with such a movie that leaves you with so much to think about and so much to talk about. But let's start with introductions. So Michelle, I'm going to allow wisdom to go first. If you will just introduce yourself, and then we'll go around the circle. Kamau, Aneelah, and then I'll introduce myself.
Thank you so much, Monisha. So hello, everyone. My name is Michele Storms, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm the executive director of the ACLU of Washington. It is my pleasure to be here. Monisha, I don't know if there's anything more you needed me to say than that.
Well, I know you're going to share a lot, so people will, if they don't know you, they're going to learn about you.
Yes.
Kamau.
Hi, everyone. Kamau, he, him. I lead the Washington Community Alliance, which has been incubating Washington for Black Lives, coalition of Black-led WCA organizations that have been organized for the last year in the wake of the unprecedented protests that all of us, so many of us took part in, and excited to dig into this, and always happy to be with Equal Rights Washington.
Aneelah.
Sure. Hello, everybody. Aneelah Afzali, she, her pronouns. I'm the executive director of the American Muslim Empowerment Network at the Muslim Association of Puget Sound. I'm also an advisory board member with Washington for Black Lives and a recovering attorney. I left my legal career in 2013 after a spiritual transformation. And since then, I've been very fortunate to work on the front lines of justice advocacy and really building bridges of understanding and unity.
Wonderful.
Honored to be here.
Thank you so much, Aneelah. And I realize that even at the beginning of this thing, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Monisha Harrell. I'm the board chair of Equal Rights Washington. And I am just so grateful to have friends like these in community. We work alongside so many amazing, amazing people, minds, and organizations. And this is just one opportunity for us to work together and come together and share a film that I thought we could really talk about, especially as pertains to the things that are still happening today. So let's kick it off. Kamau, I'm going to start with you. That was a lot. What were your first impressions?
I think the first thing I took away was in the era of J. Edgar Hoover, something that's so clear then in the context of the conversations that we've all been having about the role of law enforcement, the way law enforcement needs to change, is they, as the FBI, never saw themselves as protectors of the civil rights movement. Because if you thought that the civil rights leaders had full and equal citizenship as Americans, and believed in the line that MLK says near the end in his last speech, that this is a country that's founded on the premise of the ideals of democracy, and protests are an integral part of that, you would know that a Black pastor in the Deep South is someone who's going to be targeted by white supremacists. And if you were, at the top, at the commanding heights of law enforcement in America, and you viewed Black people as equal citizens, that would be your top concern, was, these are people who are fighting for their rights in alignment of the highest ideals of our country. And it's our job as the agency to be protectors. But instead, they viewed their role as not protecting the country, right, with MLK and the civil rights movement and Black folks in the South, having full citizenship. They were concerned about protecting white institutional power. And it was MLK and the civil rights movement that was the problem, that needed to be surveilled. And, that obviously concludes in the tragedy of Dr. King being assassinated, the FBI trying to play catch up so that they don't lose legitimacy. And I think it's, it brings a lot to mind about the lessons we have now, about the ways we have a lot of institutions now, especially in law enforcement and elsewhere, that have yet to make that shift to what I think is common sense for everybody, which is if you have the trust of the public to be protectors, that's what you should be doing, is protecting the people, and not institutional power and kind of the old hierarchies of human value that have been inherited into some of these institutions. So that was the through line that I kept on coming to mind over and over in the film.
Yeah. Aneelah, what about you?
Yeah, so I've got a lot of different emotions going through me having watched that documentary. It is very, very powerful and well done. One of the themes, or one of the concepts that just keeps coming back to my mind, is this idea that in 50 years, or 50 plus years, so much is still the same. that you would think we had made all this progress and that we would see significant change from what we saw in that video. But unfortunately, a lot of it continues today. And we heard some of that from Sam at the beginning of before the movie as well. And also it reinforces in my mind what I say a lot of times in a lot of the talks I give, how these various forms of struggle that we face are absolutely connected. So when I'm combating Islamophobia, I am also, or I have to also be combating anti-Black racism, for instance, because of the very direct connection between the two. We've seen how Black and brown leaders, Black in particular, leaders throughout history have been targeted and surveilled, attacked, criminalized, assassinated, arrested, and more. And a lot of that, a lot of the tools used there have been used against other communities. And then the tools that are now used against the American Muslim community are also tools, including by FBI, surveillance and targeting and social media, warrantless searches and everything else. These are techniques that are also going to come back and hurt our Black and brown communities as well. So seeing a lot of this, that kind of similarity. And another point that I've made before, and I know many of you have as well, which is, the whitewashed version of Martin Luther King that we celebrate today is very different from who he was in his lifetime and the radical nature of his revolutionary work and peace activism. And it's very different. And we celebrate a different version of him, a tamed down version. And that's an intentional attempt to try to sort of neuter, essentially is the way I would describe it, neuter the impact of somebody like him, a great mind like him. A lot of people sort of pose Malcolm X as sort of, the opposite of Martin Luther King, when in fact they had a lot in common and they shared similar goals. And especially at the end of their life, both of whom were assassinated, killed before they reached age 40 even, both Black leaders, amazing Black leaders who shared the same goals and actually were very close to sort of aligned in thinking near the end of their lives. So it's very, very powerful what Kamau said about who the problem is, who FBI and other law enforcement has seen as the problem. That's something that we continue to see today, certainly with the Black community, but with the Muslim community, I see it as well, both in terms of surveillance and targeting. But even at protests, when we've shown up, when there's been anti-Muslim hate groups show up and Proud Boys and Patriots prayers are there, and they're literally right there with law enforcement. Who's law enforcement turned their attention towards? It's not the Proud Boys or the white supremacists. It's directly at the Muslim community and our allies that have stood with us. We've experienced that directly in Seattle and many other places as well. So the final piece I'll just add, before a lot more to say, of course, but the final piece I'll add is watching this documentary and then also hearing about just last month, the release of the information about Malcolm X, his assassination, how FBI and NYPD were involved there as well in his murder. It's not surprising. This is something sort of that's been known by a lot of people, but it's just reinforcement of the very serious concerns and how these various forms of surveillance really hurt us all as Americans.
Yes, all of that. Michele.
Well, I do feel like Kamau and Aneelah between them have pretty well nailed it. I'll just add a tiny bit. I'm going to try to boil this down to two thoughts. And one of these is related to what Kamau shared. I was thinking about, there was this moment when they were asking people, oh, what do you think of Martin Luther King? And this one man said, well, I'm with J. Edgar Hoover. And he said something to the effect of, King, if he is a human, right, if he even is a human, then he's whatever the line went on to be. And then later in the film, there was a moment when Martin Luther King was being interviewed, and he said something about, because he had been asked, why is it that all other immigrant groups come into this country and they're successful and Black people just can't get it together? Is it because they're Black? And he said, Black people were the only ones who were slaves in this country. And he says, and all the things that flowed from that, and that Black people had not been looked upon as people. So what I want to say about that, connecting the gentleman who said, if he's even a man, or if he's even a human being, to King's asserting and that, through slavery and beyond, Black people were not seen as Black people. I was sitting there thinking to myself, and have we gotten to a place yet where Black people are seen as fully human by so many forces, by law enforcement, by the way we know within the criminal law system, how Blacks get heavier sentences or are prosecuted more readily or policed. And it just that theme of have we even gotten to the point of recognizing the full humanity of Black people even now? And then I think the second thing that I would just say, and this ties into some of the things that Aneelah brought up with regard to surveillance, it's so entertaining almost. In the beginning, you see them unscrewing like the phone piece to put the wiretap in, and how heavily surveillance was present then with what antiquated tools they have. And now, my friends, understand the intensity of the tools that we have now with face surveillance and automated decision making. Aneelah, you know this as the co-chair of the Tech Equity Group, right? The tools are so much more advanced and they are in use. So those are the things that I'll say right now, and I'll stop there.
Yeah,
And
and
correct.
oh, go ahead,
Sorry,
Aneelah.
Monisha, I just wanted to correct. I'm not the co-chair. I'm a member of the Tech Equity Coalition.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay. Sorry.
But I wanted to point out the things that really stood out to me. So I previewed this film without the advantage of director Pollard's introduction, and so I felt like his introduction kind of gave you a little bit of a warning as to what you were about to see that I didn't have when I first saw the film. And the thing that hit me when I left the film was a lot of what you all said, the lengths to which white supremacy will go to protect and defend itself. I mean, that was a lot of resources, a lot of government resources, a lot of technology, which at that time, pricey technology, it looks like nothing now, but a lot of technology, a lot of resources, a lot of attention, to the extent that they would go to a hotel and bug a room and ensure that Dr. King got put in that room. And it just, to the extent with which the status quo will protect itself to prevent equality, right? So that really just, that struck me in how much energy they would put into trying to destroy one person. And then the thought of, and how many did they actually get to? We have this myth that Dr. King and Malcolm X and others are these rare are these rare kind of leaders in a moment where there weren't other leaders. But we have no idea the ones who got that letter from the FBI, who got that message and said, you know what, for protection of myself, for protection of my family, I'm going to step back. And so we also have to keep in mind that what we're seeing is what we know of. And, Hoover was very clear that there were at least 90 other people that they were surveilling in that same way through the film. And I don't even believe that, and I believe that number is likely much higher. But the resources that they put into fighting equality were actually fairly remarkable.
And Monisha, if I could just jump on that, when you talk about the lengths and the resources that they went to, and I think about also the lawlessness of what they did. And you think about sending a letter that suggests you should kill yourself, right? This was in the very beginning of the film, someone's, I don't know who, it was a voiceover, humans are convinced of their own righteousness. And that was a quote in the very beginning. And I said, yes, that is clearly what's going on. You are so convinced of your own righteousness that you will break the law, you will go far beyond what any moral bounds you might claim to have in any other context, right? So I just had to make that observation following on what you said.
What was fascinating about that particular moment was something that we have a lot of great, I don't know if I want to call them activists, because it's like, I think there's this radical notion to being an activist, but people who are just like fighting for justice. And there's we've often gotten people, particularly in Twitter and other formats, where they'll pretend to be someone or something else. And what dawned on me is that point in the movie when the FBI wrote Dr. King a letter pretending to be an anonymous Black person, in order to say, like, you know, I'm disappointed in you and you should step down, and how it went to some lengths to say how bad at it they were. They knew that it was not an anonymous Black person because they couldn't get the speech. So it also dawned on me that after, you know, 50, 60 years, they still haven't figured out how to culturally imitate Black folks in order to be able to fit in, but that they were still trying back in the day. So I wanted to add, there's a question in the chat that asked, did other outlets not publish the sexual accusations against Dr. King? And if not, why didn't they do it? And I think that it was something that people knew. Did any of you ever grow up kind of knowing or hearing that Dr. King kind of had this, you know, kind of secret in the closet or anything like that?
I wouldn't say necessarily when I was younger, but later on for sure, I had heard about, you know, just him being a flawed man like so many others are. So I had heard that for sure. It doesn't take away from the power of his movement, the movement work that he did. It just reinforces that point that even flawed human beings, as we all are, can have the profound ability to make a huge impact.
For me, I think those had come out, and I imagine at the time there were rumors because there was a little bit of the cute moment in the Meet the Press interview where the interviewer makes a comment about how frequently Dr. King is going to New York, and that the thing I drew from that was one, how bold J. Edgar Hoover was in that he expected this to be kind of front page coverage in the New York Times. And the real anger seemed to be that his own viewpoint that Dr. King's personal morality would then undermine the moral claims of the movement, which were not about an individual. And for Edgar Hoover and kind of people with that mindset, to them, like this was all the same. If you can prove that Dr. King is, you know, amoral in his personal life, then it undermines the moral claims, you know, for masses of Black people. And these kind of, like, it didn't click to him that people were asking for institutional rights. And to him, he viewed it as, you know, there's this Black Messiah figure. And that seemed to, you know, be the point. And I think also too, when I'm a little bit younger, so when some of the stories like these Dr. King would come up in school and would kind of, you know, be to kind of jokingly needle and undermine Dr. King or that sort of thing. I think that's the case, you know, even now in sort of internet meme culture, but it always kind of touches on how the kind of personification of the movement made it vulnerable to those sorts of things, but also, you know, the people making those claims didn't quite understand what this was all about and why so many people were showing up to rallies to hear Dr. King.
I want to ask each of you a question because each of you is a strong leader in the community, but also, you know, there's baggage that comes with that, right? One of the quotes that struck me from the film was as they were asking Dr. King, as he was clearly having meetings with high-ranking electeds who were kind of saying, like, we have this information, back down. And the narration kind of said something about staying calm is necessary for survival, necessary for success. How has that shown up for you? 50 years later, that idea of staying calm as necessary for survival and necessary for success. Michele, if I could start with you on that.
Well, thank you for that. And, that's not something that I've thought about directly, but let me think about it right now. Um, you know, Certainly it helps to stay calm. And an idea that pops into my head right now is actually, I think for members of the Black community in particular, although I don't think it's exclusive to the Black community, is stereotypes that would suggest that we are not calm or rational, likely to be angry or engage in criminality. And it's unfortunate because as human beings, we have a full range. And in activism and in our justice work, like sometimes we can talk about it very calmly, but we also feel very passionate. And sometimes there's rage, and rage is appropriate, right? And sometimes there's heartbreak and sorrow, and that's also appropriate. So I guess I would say it takes all those things to do this work. But indeed, it is true that when we're in certain situations, right, we want to come in with that calm, even though we might have to go later and weep or rail or do whatever, because the work is very difficult. So I'll stop there.
Aneelah.
Michele, you described it so powerfully and beautifully, so thank you for that. I'll say yes, absolutely, it's critical to have that calmness. And I've personally experienced the power of that calmness, right sort of on the ground. I remember in particular one of the white supremacist rallies where we showed up to sort of counter that. And again, there's a line of law enforcement, and there was a group of us faith leaders, and we stood together and we saw some of the far left or the folks dressed in all black, who some of them might have been identifying as Antifa, even mumbling about some things like they wanted to have some kind of engagement with the officers, the cops there. And us faith leaders, we were kind of like in between, and we said, you know what, we need to be a calming presence right now. That's the role that we can play. So we just sort of looped arms and we just started singing right there, right in front of the cops, and right behind us were other people that might have gotten targeted by the cops as well. So having that calmness is so important in those kinds of moments. And even in those moments, the other faith leaders who were with me were especially protective of me, because they said the police started looking at me and talking about me and specifically pointing me out, again, wearing a head covering. All of a sudden I'm, demonized in a certain way. So that was an example of what you're talking about the need for calmness. And I could relate it so well to watching these videos, this footage of Dr. King facing what he and other Black civil rights leaders had to face. And the amount of calmness that they were able to show is mind-boggling, particularly if you don't have, or if you don't understand the strength of faith. It was what I will say, at least, because that was shocking and surprising to me before I had my spiritual transformation. I could not have done some of the work I do now if I did not personally have my faith to give me that strength, that ability to stay calm in the face of that ability to even show forgiveness and kindness to somebody who rolls down their window and yells obscenities at me, to be able to have that kind of like patience and still compassionate love for people who show up at an anti-Muslim rally, literally with signs on their lap, and come to talk to me at a Ask a Muslim booth and are saying all kinds of horrible things about Muslims and Islam, and still to be able to have compassion and love and talk to them and humanize them, even as they are dehumanizing me and people who look and think like me or act like me, pray like me. So it is a powerful force to have that calming nature. And I personally subscribe it to my faith, and I can see that with Dr. King as well. I'm not saying it's the only thing that can give you that kind of calmness, but I can now understand that, at least for somebody like Dr. King, how grounding and powerful his faith must have been for him and so many other Black leaders to be able to withstand some of the direct attacks and direct physical attacks and verbal threats and everything else that they were experiencing. It's powerful.
That's so well put. Something I noticed as a through line, like on this question, is there's when the powers that be asking you to be calm and not from a place of strength, but from trying to undermine your agency, telling you what to do and how to show up, and also in sort of like to be subdued and reverent to power. And then there's what Aneelah talked about really so well, in that when you choose calmness as a movement from a point of discipline and militancy, and how powerful that could be. And then when that's in contrast to, the way Hoover was crafting the agency, from like a look perspective, which is also so speaks to a little bit of the views of masculinity of that era, that for you to be strong, tough, you needed to be a white guy, 6 foot, who could pass this physical exam, and that's what's going to communicate your power. And when you contrast that with the movement, where the movement doesn't care what you look like, almost like as structurally, like as uh the way it's constitutionally made up. It's not about what you look like, but it's how you're showing up, what your values are, and are you expressing a kind of militant calm and discipline. And just from a leadership standpoint and point of how you lead people or craft um, large mobilizations, that was something that really stuck out to me. There was no kind of talk of values on the other side. It was all showboating, and on the other side you see what real leadership looks like when you're aspiring towards true multiracial democracy and values of equality from that standpoint. So that was what I took away.
It's interesting because as you were saying that and you were talking about the piece with Hoover, that he built the agency in his image. And I was just struck by was he supposed to be God? The whole idea that he built the agency in his image, and harken back to me that idea that absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? That this wasn't somebody who was elected, and yet the power that Hoover wielded was so absolutely remarkable that in the crafting of the agency after his image, it wasn't come out, as you had mentioned, a values proposition of these are the values I hold, and so I will build an agency on those values, but literally, I am a white guy who is 6 feet tall. That is what I want. That's a G-man. So it really does strike me that when you don't check that next layer of power, we elect people at this level, but when you don't check that next layer of power, that can be in power for decades. That is where the rot is. And we can see that now. And I would hope that we would have learned our lesson. It was very interesting to hear James Comey's voice in the documentary and thinking, about how he wielded some of his power, right? And so it puts it all into a lot of perspective that I am, I'm still tapping into as we're having these discussions. I wanna talk about one piece that came from Dr. King. He said, with this kind of creative and constructive coalition, we can move forward. And so there was a lot to be aware of in that, in the film. But what made me also think of you and the work that we've all done together is that sentence from Dr. King: with this kind of creative and constructive coalition, we can move forward together. Kamau, you have made a lot of your work around the building of creative and constructive coalitions. Why do you think that's so important, and how do you think it has been working?
That's really great, and a great question. I mean, the thing that I think about is we need so many people to overcome the institutional barriers that you have to build as broad of a movement as possible, and you have to stretch out across as many communities as you can to bring everyone together and be able to accomplish the sort of big things that we're talking about. Like something that stood out to me was, in that there's a speech that Dr. King is quoted in the film, and you can hear him talking about the same communities. He's talking about the struggles that Black people are having in the South, and then connects it to Native Americans, Asian Americans, Mexican Americans, and to even I think he says Appalachian whites, and it shows you how long people have been trying to craft a multiracial coalition, and you can even hear the echoes that go way back to kind of Frederick Douglass, Reconstruction, and the kind of composite nation ideas. And it's so important for us to recognize that we're trying to go really far. We're going to need a lot of people to come along with us, and part of that isn't just the sort of strategy of numbers, but as you do that, you start finding out how the struggles are linked together, and you can watch Dr. King evolving towards bigger calls for economic justice, and those sorts of things, because as you're working together, you figure out how similar the struggles are, but also where they're different, where people need to show up for each other. So it's as much about a learning and iterative process of you and your kind of particular movement and demands, and figuring out how you can be successful, as much as it is also trying to win over as many people as possible. And I think we're lucky enough that there's so many great organizations in Washington State, and so many people that have been at this for a while, going back to like the Four Amigos in Washington State, that we have a really beautiful lineage to draw upon for coalition building across race and across geography to win the big things that our people demand.
Michele.
Well, I absolutely agree. Literally, united we stand, divided we fall, right? And I think about moments like in the early times of our former president's administration, when he came out so hard against the Muslim community with the travel bans and all of those things that followed. And being in all the spaces, being at the airport that weekend with a multiracial, intergenerational group of people stepping up in solidarity to say, this is wrong. I think about this past summer when, just a few too many terrible actions against Black people with law enforcement, or Ahmaud Arbery with, private citizens, whatever, multiracial, intergenerational effort of people coming together. This is this is the path we have to be on to make real change, to have there be true justice and fairness for all people. It is many years ago, I was at a race equity training, and something someone said is, when your group, the Black folks, are fighting the Asians or fighting the Indigenous folks, who's winning? Who's winning when you all are fighting each other? And that's a wake-up call. we ought not to be fighting each other when we are really trying to get across these barriers. We just had last night, in partnership with National African American Reparations Commission and Suru for Solidarity, a Japanese American group, we had put on a program touching about HR 40 and reparations and the Japanese American community, as it did when the threats against the Muslim community were at their height, are also, and standing with that community, are now really backing up the Black community in inviting this conversation about reparations. So this constructive, creative community building is literally the solution, and we are doing it. And the bigger that gets, the closer we will get to the America we dream of.
Wonderful. Aneelah, I will give you the last word on this question, and then we will wrap up and thank our attendees for joining us today.
Yes, thank you so much. It's a big conversation topic, and I'm very active on coalitions for this very reason. We will all recognize this. Our liberation absolutely is connected. So the more we are able to understand that and show up for each other, the more powerful we can actually be. We absolutely need that multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-generational, multilingual, multi-class, multi-gender, we need that kind of coalition to really come together and take action against the injustices of our day, especially because, as Michele pointed out, there has been this divide and conquer technique that has been used throughout history. It's not new that what we're seeing now, it isn't new during Dr. King's time. It was used throughout history. And I know that Kamau alluded to this as well, even talking about Reconstruction. White and Black folks actually came together, following during the Reconstruction phase in order to challenge some of the injustices, and real change was being achieved as a result of that coming together. And unfortunately, the white supremacy could not stand seeing that kind of unity, that kind of coalition building, that kind of constructive coalitions coming together and creating change. And that's why the KKK was actually initially created, was to target white folks who were partnering with Black folks. And we saw that, with the civil rights movement and what happened there with the Southern strategy as a way to divide sort of white people from Black people and keep the groups divided in order to spread fear and disconnection, so that we are not able to organize together as we should when we understand how interconnected our various issues absolutely are. So that is the solution. And Dr. King certainly recognized it. And he also recognized how it can't just be an Americentric kind of like an America-centric kind of perspective. He understood it when he challenged the military-industrial complex and specifically called out what was happening in Vietnam, as even mentioned in the movie, in the documentary, that was the year, it was after that he was targeted the most, was because he dared to challenge the military-industrial complex. And we've seen that in today's time as well, with the war in Afghanistan, for instance. No matter what party the president seems to come from, they are not able to put an end to sort of the continued warfare that funds so many different corporations in our country, the defense industry, and so much more, and the lobbying that's connected to that. So many of our politicians are affected by that it doesn't matter what political party you are from, you are connected to the military-industrial complex in certain ways that makes it really difficult to challenge our foreign policy. So the more we are able to understand, exactly as Dr. King taught us, that injustice anywhere truly is a threat to justice everywhere, the more powerful we can be in sort of advocating for the causes that we all deserve and really want to see. As I've said before, and others may have heard me or others say this too, is like we absolutely have to advocate together. Otherwise, we risk dying apart politically. And that's the kind of siloing that has happened at times. And that's something that is used to continue. Islamophobia, racism, sexism, all of this is used to divide us. And we have to be stronger than that. We really have to come together in really powerful ways. And part of this movie and this conversation is part of that effort. So I'm very, very happy and grateful to be here with everyone.
I want to thank you all for being here. I want to speak into the room before we leave something that Maria put in the chat, which was what struck her was the woman who asked Dr. King, "Don't you think you're asking for too much too quickly?" That struck me as well. And it made me think that maybe some of Dr. King's best sermons came from the things that people asked him, because he had the whole sermon about how when people tell you to wait on time. And I thought, well, he might have written that, and that might have been the clap back to that woman. So I appreciate the three of you. I appreciate our audience for being here. For those of you who may watch this on a recording, thank you so much for joining us. We want to continue to have these important conversations, but more importantly, we want to continue to work together in community because we need all of us in this journey together. Thank you, Michelle, Kamau, Aneelah. Thank you to the organizers that helped us, both my team at Equal Rights Washington, because you all don't get enough credit, and for the team at ACLU Washington, who has been absolutely amazing in helping us through this. We thank you for bearing with us through the small technical glitches we had tonight, and we hope that you will share this film and talk with others about what's going on, and please continue to join us in this work. Have a good evening and have a good rest of the week. Good night.